everybody. It's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today, we're kind of doing a bit of a hodgepodge. We're going to continue and finish up the discussion we started last time around about what was originally kind of a career transition sort of model. And we sort of realized, well, it applies to a great deal of life transitions as well, and applies to a lot of different things. So I wanted to pick up there, talk a little bit about how we applied this model to the myriad situations that aren't related to career searches, but could still benefit from approaching it in these 9 different sorts of ways. So I'd like to do that. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was forces of energy and how they may be working against themselves and why that might be a good thing. Hopefully that sounds very mysterious and raised your level of tension in the name of curiosity alone. We'll get there. And then I'd certainly like to finish up our walk around these 25 different areas of the change grid so that we can really finish up that deep dive into all the different layers and see where they might all be overlaying. Okay, so with that, before we started the recording, we were having an interesting little conversation, and I seem to, at this moment, have forgotten where we left off. So I believe, Brian, you were saying something?
We're talking about the in-grid
Yes.
behaviors, and Tim had mentioned about, from a DEI perspective, and I was asking, is that pre-aware? Because it seems like some of that is you know, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Perspective. So that's why I was asking about
Yeah.
that, like,
Well, and here's where,
stage.
not kind of remember wanting to say, well, we need to make sure we're always aware of the fact that we are looking at their situation from 2 different tension management vantage points simultaneously. And what I mean by that is that it is true that when we look at that population and we ask ourselves, where does a population like that tend to live on the grand change grid of life? It does tend to be a little bit more on the grid side of things, because that population includes people who aren't very sure of themselves, aren't really taking any kind of growth risks, trying to withdraw as much as they can. Perhaps they're abused in one way, shape, or form. Perhaps they're dealing with whatever substance issues or mental health issues they happen to be dealing with. It's a very what to say. I don't want to say distinct population, but it's a very real population that has to be somewhere on the grand change grid of life. That being said, when we look at each individual as a person, as a singular human being, we always have to remember they have a full change grid available to them at all times. Mm-hmm. So their idea of a situation that would put them up in stress, it could very well be a situation that wouldn't put us up into stress. So for example, if bad weather is coming, and the question is, finding a warm place to sleep tonight, the vast majority of us are going to say, well, our ability to do that is extremely high. The challenge is quite low. There's really nothing to be worried about in the grand scheme of things. But we'd have other people who are very much wondering, can they even make it for the night? Where might they find a better sheet of cardboard or whatever it happens to be? So for them, things we take for granted would be profoundly stressful experiences. So I think we always have to honor the individual with this, reminding ourselves that they do have a full change grid, but maybe their world is just a little more limited, a little more constrained by the realities of whatever's going on with them. So I've babbled a lot. What do you guys think about what I've just said there?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yep.
Yeah, and so so when I go, like, we don't tend to talk about in-grid things though, because we don't tend to focus on that population unless those of you among the circle are focusing on that kind of that segment of humanity. That's really fine, but I'm saying that as we go about using the change grid, we don't frequently find ourselves in situations where we're using that population. And even if we apply to the individuals, we don't frequently find people populating their activity lists with a lot of in-grid activities. Why would that be true? Or do you think I'm right, wrong? I mean, think about that. Why is it we don't tend to talk to people about in-grid issues?
I'm thinking it's perhaps because, certainly as I think of your question and apply it to self,
Yeah.
it's because the focus is more on pushing towards engagement and execution,
Oh,
which,
yeah.
so
Yeah,
there's
well,
there's less attention to the in-grid positioning.
right. And I go back to what's the very first rule of tension management?
People pay attention to where they find their
People pay
tension.
attention to where they find their tension. And so if the truth is in the environment of their brain and all the external reality that's going along with it, you know, they've got their own laundry list of things that are putting them either too far upgrade, so things outside of them that are imposing themselves on the person, or hopefully if they're not in any distress, they've got something they're working on. And, you know, they want to be moving out grid. So change occurs only two places on the change grid, upgrade and outgrid. And so what's left? What's left is, well, downgrade, but usually we want to take a look at downgrade because we go like, that's where all the skills are. That's where the real ability lives. If we can help them to somehow or another redeploy it or apply it in a more creative way, whatever, we might be able to leverage what they've already got to help them go to wherever they're going or solve whatever they're trying to solve. And so by the time we're done talking about upgrade, outgrade, and downgrade issues, we don't really have much time, energy, or space to be talking about stuff that's going on in grid. As David pointed out, though, once in a while, you're going to find somebody who's got a lot of things floating further in grid than perhaps you would want. And that's a different situation to be in. So David, if you want to share a little bit more about that situation.
What I have encountered is people up near 06, 05, 1516. And I'm wondering if, you know, they're outside the circle, if they're in a danger zone.
Yeah. Yeah, very well. As they, you know, again, they're applying their own change grid to their life. You can't operate in life without a whole change grid floating around your head somewhere. So for whatever reasons, they are where they are around that particular activity. But think of what they're saying there. They're saying like, look, it's not overly hard. You gave it a 5 or a 6, but it's 5 or 6 times the ability I believe I have to bring to whatever the puzzle happens to be, the situation happens to be. I am not the guy for this job, right? You know what I mean? They're not up in stress about it. I mean, well, that's not fair to say. If I really go to that layer, we know that areas 23, 24, 25 have an ever increasing slice of stress populating them. Am I right? Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I get that, but the way that area 24 might be experiencing and expressing that stress would be very different than how 25 would do it, and certainly very different than how 10 would do it, because that perceived level of challenge becomes, I don't know if it's true mathematically, but I think it would be almost more of a geometric progression, that the intensity, it's got to be the intensity of the stress is going up as the ratio of challenge to ability gets significantly higher and higher. I know that's a lot of words, but you know what I'm saying is that if you've got an ability of a 1 and you're facing a challenge of a 3, you're going to feel very differently than you would if that challenge was an 11.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This is interesting. I think this explains a lot about humanity in general, because it seems like if you look at all of the social ills that plague humanity, people tend to that respond out of a crisis. Like that's when they get it. Like that grabs your attention, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so now you're forced to respond to it. And it's often, you know, these things that we just neglected.
Well, but why did you, was neglect an active decision process? Is that an active verb, or is it a judgment of someone's?
It's sometimes like I'm thinking like healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Like inflammation and pain will get your attention, but awareness should arrive at the point where you try to figure out what's going on, because the body is speaking.
Yeah. And I guess I'm kind of thinking more about what neglect really means. I suppose we could look at the root words of it, but am I aware when I'm is neglecting something a deliberate conscious choice I've made, or is neglecting something something I'm not really all that consciously aware of, but
I
other
think it can
people
be
seem to
both,
be?
T.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
both. It's a dimensional aspect. It's both.
Yeah. So, but when you're talking about going on in number, wherever, whatever area we're talking about, do you think it's more about neglect or more about unaware, an awareness of what's really going on?
The unawareness,
Yeah.
typically where it starts. And again, just like with anything with human behavior, it becomes a conditioning,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Absolutely. Hmm.
And
And
so
that's,
we'll
by the way, how someone's world could end up becoming a world of great expansive thinking and opportunity, or a world of very confined
mm,
thinking. Everyone to a certain degree is a product of their environment.
right,
And those of us who have been able to live a comfortable life and do interesting things, we have to, at least in part, attribute it to, the blessing of birth. You know,
right, right.
we didn't choose our circumstances. Our circumstances were gifted to us one way or another.
So
So,
T, I was going to ask, and Brian, I was wondering your thought on, does unconscious bias reside in grid?
mm,
Because Brian, you made the comment earlier about not knowing what we don't know, and I agree with that. Because we talk a lot about that in our conversations around unconscious bias. And I was just curious if you felt it might live in grid on the in grid.
I think so. I think because literally, and that's why I like this layer in particularly, because I literally can account three different, if you will, gatekeepers to different nervous systems and how they respond. So essentially, like self-esteem, self-confidence, um, and you can even say um, self-concept, right? So
mhm.
like self-esteem, the respect you feel about yourself, how you buffer criticism, that's the autonomic nervous system,
Yeah.
right? It happens automatically, right? So this is part of peripheral nervous system that feeds the central nervous system. So then the physicality of it, but think about somatic nervous system, that's
Mhm.
self-confidence. So we
Yeah.
know that because when people change their physiology, it helps them to improve. You see a person who's apathetic or they have different physiology than people who are stressed, right?
Right.
So
You're talking
that's
here where they're more alert
right.
going on. Yep. Yep.
And you
Yep.
can see that in their posture,
Yep. Facial expression. Yep.
facial, everything. You can see
Yep.
central nervous system. I'd equate that to self-concept. This idea about, what you believe you developed and undeveloped and how you respond to the totality of how you respond to an environment. So these unconscious biases
Yeah.
is part of that conditioning, right? And that's what I
Mhm.
mean when I'm talking about this pre-aware or unaware, because there's a lot that the body records that the mind is playing catch up to.
I like the way you put that. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, Tim. Where do you think unconscious bias kind of resides or shows up?
I think it's in grid.
Yeah. So over here on the Ingrid side of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, so I guess the question then becomes, what level of knowledge, what level of ability is required for someone to actually develop or hold a bias at an unconscious level? Boy, we could talk about that alone for a while.
Mm,
Is bias, I would imagine a great deal of bias begins to be formed as an observer of what's going on in the world around you, what you're hearing others say that are one way or another, training you,
Yeah,
parenting you, training
yeah,
you, you're picking
and
up.
yeah, and part of it is, as you mentioned previously, about products of our environment.
Yeah.
yeah,
You know,
that's the ops.
mhm.
You're
Right.
you're an observer and a participant. So it's like cultural kinds of aspects, institutions, schools, all these things. And so we see this with cancel culture, right? I have a problem with that because you're canceling people. I agree, cancel ideologies and those kinds of things that perhaps are toxic,
Yeah.
but give people the opportunity to correct and to reconcile. And when we're canceling people, that's done because you just wash them out.
Yeah.
That's quite dangerous.
You know, and I saw that on a talk show many years ago. There was a couple on there because the issue was the fact that the man was abusive to his wife. And the man, when asked if he could explain himself, he said when he was a kid growing up, he saw his father treat his mother that way.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
He said he saw his uncles treat their wives that way. And then he said, in fact, in my neighborhood, that's how men treated women.
Yep. Absolutely.
And, you know, so here now you have this kid who's growing up in that type of an environment and watching that kind of exchange between, you know, men in his life that he loved and knew well, and
Yeah.
how he treated women. And that became a part of his child development to the extent that he began to treat his wife that way.
And so he holds it then as an unconscious bias, maybe even dips into conscious bias if he's, you know, compelled to explain his behavior or whatever. Would you agree that it's kind of existing as an unconscious sort of a thing because it's kind of just like a fiber of the way he's existed? If you confront him about it, do you think people would initially lean towards defending their position or seeing the light?
Probably defending.
Probably defending.
Yeah, I think defending.
So that would mean then that an unconscious bias becomes a conscious bias, or is labeling it as a conscious bias a value judgment we're bestowing upon another person's attitudes, beliefs, behaviors?
Depends on your expression.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
If you don't express it, if you just hold it inside, it stays an unconscious bias. But if you outwardly express it, it's conscious.
What if it only becomes, what if you become very aware of it, conscious of it, but you keep everything in your thoughts? Does that have any kind of damage? I don't want to.
It does in terms of recycling the same pain. And this is why I think, you know, I was looking at these research studies lately as to why people keep experiencing the same pain over and over again. The event has moved on, but they have not. So in other words, the internal mechanisms that, you know, for recall and memory, the internal mechanisms, and when memory works, it will recall exactly how you felt, exactly what, and these kinds of intense emotional events, I think the social psychologists call them significant emotional events. They're always better remembered than something neutral.
Yeah.
So it's like you can say 9/11 and people can vividly remember where they were, who they were with, what they were doing. But if you ask something simple like, you know, what color was a car you parked next to, you barely remember that, although it's a conscious event that you experience. But these significant emotional events has, you know, a full body experience. And these kinds of things get recorded, like what Tim was describing when the child, you know, see these kinds of things. You don't have to say anything. They're taking in the environment at a high rate and high variability, intense. You know, I remember my father used to drink quite often, and I barely drink at all because I remember the smell of it. I remember not liking how he acted, and we had a very contentious relationship.
And so you have a lot of things anchored to those.
Absolutely. And it's unconscious. You know, it just comes up and people are like, why do you don't drink? And I just never did it.
Right. And so let's think about this whole idea about pre-aware. I think that there can be a lot of unconscious, well, by definition, unconscious, it's, you know, telling us something about awareness, right? And so we know that they could be pre-aware of it, but still be holding unconscious biases that they, you know, obviously they're unconscious. They don't know anything about it. As they become aware of it, they're starting to move from this pre-aware band into awareness. Well, maybe that just moves them a little bit horizontally, a little further out grid. Maybe they're just suddenly are able to open an eye and get a glimmer of something in what they said or believe or, you know, hold dear, whatever. Maybe it's something that's very, they're very confronted by, and even now that they're aware of it, shocked by their own bias. You know, I mean, Tim, you know a lot more about this than I certainly do, but I got to believe that when people move from being unconscious to consciously aware of their biases, that some people might be, what do we say, rather lackadaisical about the whole thing. Maybe they find it a curious sort of a thing. Maybe they're open to it. Maybe they're shocked. Maybe they're ashamed. So have you
Well,
seen the full range? Yeah.
Oh,
boy,
yeah.
that's what, mhm.
Go ahead, Kathy.
That's Edie. Go ahead, Edie.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, that's when it becomes really painful. That's when people will self-medicate. They'll go to alcohol or drugs because as they become aware, but they're not expressing it, the intense awareness becomes absolutely emotionally so painful that
Yep.
they self-medicate. There's a sequence.
Yep. And so, I mean, I think, okay, Tim, you're doing a lot of educational programs that are helping people recognize their existing biases. Am I right?
Yes, and what we see sometimes happening is that if that awareness bumps up against their value system, and they resist. So even though you might be bringing, you know, your maneuver may be to bring them additional information that could raise that awareness.
Yeah.
If it's something that's deeply rooted in their value system, they'll still reject it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I add something to that, Tim?
Please, please.
Yeah, I just remember hypnotizing a principal of a school, and it was for smoking and his values. I mean, he's hanging kids and suspending them for smoking, and here he is smoking. And in the middle of the session, I think he started vomiting. It was such a disruption to his, you know, becoming so astutely aware and in conflict with his values and his beliefs that he became physically ill. Anyway, I had to add that.
No,
Yeah,
that's very good. That's very good. Yeah.
So
Yep,
what the
yep.
key to what like Tim described, he's educating people. So is the key to balance that? Because it sounds like what Edie described is like we're going, you know, you go to an extreme, right? And that's too quick. Because don't we see that now in the behavior of like this political debacle that's going on? There's no civility, right? It's an extreme. It's tribalism. You're part of my tribe or you're not. There's no central point to disagree with anyone on anything. You're
Yeah.
just outright gone. So it sounds like there has to be a balancing of these, you know, that creates a natural movement to where they need to be to get that awareness or waking them. Because for me, the experience of the experienced matters.
Yeah.
When it comes to behavior, that shifts people. It's not just going to be from head knowledge. It's the experience of the experience, going through it yourself, where your boundaries are challenged, but it can't be too extreme, or else you will defend. That's all that narrative knows, is to defend it and to hold it sacred. I think about that from a neuroscience perspective. If the brain's first order of business is to preserve and conserve energy, if you have a certain conditioning, that conditioning is going to fight to remain conditioned. It's not going to allow you to move it.
Right. Well, and I think this is something that we talk about in pride-based leadership, and what you've just described, or what we're describing here, is really something that must be happening as part of that spiral dynamic. So you guys remember the discussions about spiral dynamics? Spiral dynamics is the study of the historical progressions that have been made in human values. And so over the course of blah, 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 you know, generations, whatever, there have been many advancements that have been made along the spiral. So the spiral keeps going up, 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 up. Well, the spiral has to be stimulated by something. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what are the kinds of things that stimulate the value system of a population to evolve? And some of those things are, and I'll throw them out as you kind of brought them up, is that some people have an ability to see a better future if certain things are changed now. And other people see those exact same changes as having a detrimental effect on the future. And so they want to hold back now. So as I picture actual human beings, if you can envision this, actual human beings marching up or down this spiral, like it's a pathway they can go up, there's a group of people that are trying to push the population up the spiral, while another group of people are trying to hold those people back, even push things down a little bit. Face it, kings and queens were not happy when they lost all their power. So, there's always going to be pushback. There's always going to be resistance. And we talk about this in pride-based leadership, where we say that inside of every organization, and I'm going to generalize it to say inside of every relationship, every dynamic, when it comes to things about society and our species and all that, there's always going to be these two forces at play. There's a force that is trying to expand, and there's a force that's trying to contain. There's a force that's trying to progress, and there's a force that's trying to conserve. And so we have to kind of recognize that these powers are always, always, always present. And so interestingly enough, when I look at the political situation that's going on, not just here, but in many places, I can't help but not see these two energies in play. And that got me into wanting to talk about this subject. I'm so glad how things kind of move where we kind of ultimately want them to end up going. Because again, I'm going to go back to these biases. I do believe that the awareness of bias and the ramifications that awareness now identifies or whatever is one of these things that is moving the value system of humanity forward. And that's going to resonate well with a certain population, and they're going to want to advance it, and it's going to rub others wrongly, and they're going to do their best to resist it. And it's not that that's true about their entire behavior as a person. I think it's very situationally specific. Am I going to be a promoter of something? Am I going to be a detractor of something? Am I moving it forward, backwards? So I think we all kind of understand that. I want to ask you guys what I think are questions worthy of the circle's consideration. But I'm curious, what do you think happens if a situation were to occur that the powers of progress, the powers of expansion were 99% active, and the resistance, the conservative sorts of side of things, the people that are trying to just wrap their hands around it, what would happen if that was pretty much non-existent? Would you end up in a good place or a bad place? And why do you think that would be the case? Was that a big question?
Could be either, I mean, could be either,
It could be either.
there is such a thing as groupthink, and I think it can be a very powerful factor.
Yeah, but what happens, like if I think about what happens if progress is something that happens unrestrained, I think that we could end up unable to sustain whatever it is that gets put into place. And again, you got to apply this to values, to whatever. We want to not only, in fact, I forget whose comment it was. It was on NPR. It was about either the Ukraine or someplace else. It might have been Israel, Palestine. Don't remember, but someone said something very profound. They said, it's one thing for our forces to be able to take an area. It's entirely another thing to see if we can hold on to it. And so they said the act of taking territory consumes what am I saying? An unreasonable amount of resources if we know going into it that we have no ability to hold it, to hold the territory. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if we've got a whole bunch of energy about expansion and growth and movement and advancement and people seeing the light and, doing everything in its ultimate positive kind of way, that can end up becoming something that is unsustainable, overwhelming. Again, putting this back to how it applies into a corporate setting, there are certain roles inside of that organization that are most definitely focused on expansion. And there are others that are very much about, wait. We have to do this thoughtfully. We have to do this carefully. We have to, use our resources properly. We have to get our hands wrapped around it. So inside of an organization, what kind of roles do you think are all focused on expanding, and what roles are all about restraining, holding back, controlling, conserving? Who's who?
See, I have a slightly different view of this. Maybe this is outside of the box, but I'll just bring it up.
Please do.
I tend to find that there are way too many individuals out there that are what I call intellectually lazy.
Yeah.
They just don't really, it's not about them progressing or not. If you ask them, they said, sure, I want to progress. But in their mind, they don't want to expend the energy necessary
Yep.
to do that. And it can be on either side of the aisle. It's not, if you look at it from the political standpoint, it could be either side of the aisle. They just don't want to expend energy. And
Yep.
those are typically the people that you find at the lower rungs of an organization as well, right? They
Right.
don't want to be in a management role and be responsible for others and be in a leadership position.
Yeah. And they would basically be here then in that advocator role. They're happy to tell you what's wrong and how to fix it, but they themselves don't want to step up and do that. That energy or that mindset is present on both sides of every conflict at all times. They just have the different viewpoints. It's just, the opposite of whatever the position is of the other group. So there's always these people who want to talk about a situation, but aren't willing to step up and do anything or join in or whatever, in which case I say, well, then, stop your complaining, because you're not enhancing your own life. You're not really enhancing anybody else. Obviously, you aren't very effective at swaying people's way of thinking. So just go get an ice cream cone or something.
Wouldn't they be more of the follower type as opposed to the advocator? The way that
Well, no. Now you're dropping them all the way, because in order for them to not be an advocator, not to have an opinion about anything, they'd have to freely acknowledge that their ability is very low, and the challenge of what they're ready, willing, and able to do is also quite low.
I think, but that's the point I'm trying to make, is I think they live in the follower area. They talk a lot, but they're really not an advocator, because they're just parroting somebody else's perspective.
Okay, if they're only parroting someone else's perspective, but do they hold the belief that they know what they're talking about? Then they're perceiving their ability as being very high. They'd be more of that thinker kind of thing, which means they definitely have an opinion. They're definitely judging everything they're seeing, but they're choosing to say nothing about it. If they're all the way down here in apathy, they might be choosing to grumble about it. If they're getting a little bit further upgrade, they might be willing to share some sage advice that other people should implement, but they're not willing to step further into those engagement rings to really get the work done. Does that resonate with you, Boris, or does that match for you? So
I don't know. For some reason, when you like the diagram you're showing right now, I think these people live in that pre-aware to awareness, right in between hyper and hypo awareness, that empty void there.
Yeah,
that's where I see those people living right there.
Sure.
Yeah, they just don't want to admit the fact that they don't want to expend any energy, right, even though they're aware of the different points of view. They don't want to expend any energy to even research them.
Well, no, absolutely not. And so they're willing to just go with the flow wherever the flow happens to be going.
Exactly.
They're still kind of there, but you know what? They're not involved in the advancement of values or in the holding back of values. They're one of the countless spectators who have, decided not to participate. Okay. that's all fine and dandy. But what about the people that are pushing it, or the people that are holding back, or whatever the case may be? I think that what I kind of want to get to in this is that we need these different energies to be in strong opposition to one another. It is a very dangerous situation for either one of those energies to become the norm, or the
Dominant.
but I'm talking about, yeah, dominant plus kind of sort of a thing. Because if I'm too conservative, then there's going to be no advancement. If I'm too progressive, then it could be all willy-nilly and too, I want to say, chaotic, too random, too whatever. I need to have some balance. I need to be in the middle. So again, going back to an organization, the people that are trying to get the company to expand, to grow, are generally the CEO. Definitely wants to do that. I'd even say the chairman wants to do that because they want to make higher levels of profit and that sort of a thing. I think if I pulled into play the marketing people, the sales people, these are all about expand, grow, 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 grow. Who are the voices that come along and say, wait a minute?
The people who have to do the work.
The people that have to do the work, but even in the C-suite, that's the COO and the CFO. So because the CFO is kind of saying, like, you can put together all these amazing dreams you want to talk about, but where are you going to get the money for it? It's not here. Or you get the COO who comes along and says, well, it all sounds very, very good, but we do not have the infrastructure. We do not have the equipment. We do not have the team members that are required to do that. These are the voices that just say, I'm not trying to stop you from progressing. I'm just saying,
trying to bring a little bit of reality into the conversation. See, I think they both have value.
Absolutely.
I'm reading a book called Originalism, and Adam Grant. Adam Grant.
Yeah.
And he talks about the value of procrastination.
Absolutely. Gives us some time to just double check, to be sure, to make sure that we're not making some emotionally driven kind of a thing, kind of a decision that's going on there. Okay, so the next question for you guys as the circle is that if we kind of recognize that both of these perspectives have value, then the question becomes, what happens when these two different perspectives stop respecting one another and begin to hate one another?
Oh, now you have a problem.
Yeah, values lost, then, or at least potentiality to create the
values
value.
are compromised.
Exactly.
This is exactly right. What's going to happen to progress? All that's going to be, we're going to stop, and to stop is to die.
The opposite of progress is Congress.
Well, tell us what that's all about. A gathering of a clogged artery. That's what we're doing. And the whole spiral dynamic of life, it creates this horrible, blockage. Well, here's the harsh reality that the spiral actually brings into the discussion. And that is that no matter how hard people try to hold progress back, sooner or later, what happens?
Progress occurs.
Progress occurs. So there's no stopping that spiral. It's going to happen. The only thing that's in play then is the speed at which it's going to happen. And part of all that is what the damage is that's created along the way.
Do you think, T, that with the hyper communication environment that we reside in, that is going to affect speed, velocity?
Oh, absolutely. But think about what also is happening up there. If you are way up here, if the messages that are being delivered and repeated, installed in the minds of the, as Boris was pointing out, the lion's share of people who genuinely don't care, They're here, whatever, they're just there. Nevertheless, they're absorbing all this messaging. That messaging is coming from people that are very hyper aware about certain topics, while other people are very far out grid about it. So we've got that very strong, let me change the background. We've got that whole driven driver thing that's happening very far, though that's some messaging that's getting out there. It's bumping into the expressives. And by the way, it is not party specific, it is subject specific. All positions have their own versions or their own things that put them in those two locations. But what's the problem with both of those locations?
They're powerless.
Ultimately, they're powerless to do anything. And so that's what we really have to kind of recognize, that that whole dynamic plays itself out in how many levels of our life. Does that dynamic not play itself out at the level of a family, or the level of a neighborhood, a small community, a church group, a college kind of class? I think that dynamic is something that is part and parcel to what the human experience is really all about. The real question is, how good do we get at being able to make those two energies as productive as they can be? And that's, I think, where we come in as tension managers, because we have to be able to say that there is nothing good waiting for us at any extreme. So we have to be able to find this common ground, find this balance, find this middle place from which we can, what do I say, rebuild the trust, respect, all those good sorts of things, because we realize that without both of those energies, our demise is assured.
Right. That's a net value effect.
Exactly. But either one of those positions, or both of those energies, if you will, are equally destructive, just in different ways.
Right.
So
within these environments that you described, T, the family, the organization, the various institutions, those are all what we can say are systems, right?
Yeah.
Systems in terms of behaviors have a significant impact on behaviors. Environment plays a key role in driving these behaviors, keeping them in place. So I guess my question is, it could change in either direction. Either the system can fail because it no longer works, or either, it can change from the bottom up, right? Like where this progression that you're talking about naturally happens, occurs over time, and it changes the system.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
No, well, I think it certainly is, because now what you're talking about is the difference between change that is coming from an up-grid place versus an out-grid place. For example, how many charities have been very effective at fundraising, but have not fulfilled their missions one way or another? Okay, so what does that really mean? That tells me that whatever it is they believed was the right way to do something turned out not to be what they had planned on it really being. And so they were trying something, they were expanding, and people might have kept giving them money, kept giving them money, but there was never any return on that. There was never any outcome that was along that way. Should we allow that to continue, or does someone need to come along and say, we need to put some constraints around that. We need to put some limits. I'm sorry, we need to reduce your funding. We need to drop you as one of our charities, right? I mean, there's got to be a check and a balance that's happening at all times, because either one of these energies, the energy of being too much about controlling and containing and keeping it all stuff. I get it. You know what? If you're working for an entrepreneurial company, and Boris, you can certainly chime in lots of things that would illustrate this. It's a very big battle when you're trying to put some constraints around the person who created the idea to begin with.
I think T, you're right on here, because in any successful enterprise, you can't have an organization progress if you've got a leader that doesn't have effective leadership skills. And to me, effective leadership skills lives between 9 and 10, somewhere in that range.
Sure.
And they have to be able to bring the different perspectives on their team together. And if they're so far outgrid that they're just going to control the whole situation, they're never going to make progress. The people on their team are just going to either be followers and it's not going to work, or they're going to move on to other opportunities.
Yeah, they'll leave. They might even become the quiet resistance movement.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a really big, I mean, think about this. And maybe you guys have had a client like this. Have you ever had a client where, talking about leadership for just a second, I believe that anyone who holds a C-level title should be a decent leader. So, okay, right there. But what happens if we have a CEO and a chairman who are having an open battle with the COO and the CFO? Imagine what that dynamic must be like. I'll tell you what's going to happen. Who's got the power? It's definitely on the CEO and COO and chairman side of things. They're going to replace these people. All they're really doing is something foolish, instead of stopping and going like, wait, these people have a perspective. Maybe, just maybe, there is merit in that perspective. Well, we have to make sure that, as we understand that that dynamic is ultimately destructive, we have to make sure that we go, how does that apply not only to businesses, not only to group society, to politics? The real question is, how does that play itself out inside of the mind of each individual? So how many things are going on in your mind right now that are about things that you hold near and dear, things that you say you want to do, things, whatever it is, it's stuff that you, at least in this present moment, you own it as an intention, or whatever the case may be. But you've got these two energies that are constantly in play. And these two energies are the energy of expansion and the energy of containment. And so, are you letting one of these take the rule over the others? By the way, what do you think happens if the two are always in absolute perfect harmony? So the law of expansions and the resistance have met in perfect balance. Is that good? Is that bad? Did I just describe forward movement, or what's that dynamic really like?
T, what you're describing to me is productive versus destructive tension.
Okay.
There's always going to be that tension, and what you want to make sure is that you've got a productive tension that's going on. And if there are people in there that are committed to breaking that up, they have a destructive mindset. You need to get rid of those people.
And so what if I said to you, do you think it would be better in the long run for the organization to operate at 50-50 between those two energies? Or is it good for there to be an exchange of power that occurs in a bit of a cycle? So
I would say that I've often talked with my clients about an exchange of control. That if you're seeking control, one of the fastest ways that you can gain it is to have something to exchange for it.
Yes, tell us about that.
Well, everybody wants something. Maybe they want time, maybe they want information, maybe they want flexibility, maybe they want recognition. Everybody wants something. If you're trying to create change, then, and gaining control over something, having influence over something, one of the easiest ways to do it is to maintain the rapport of the individual across from you by exchanging something of value that may give them the incentive then to go along.
Right. Okay. And so, Ben, you've said that, I'll just interpret what you've just said as that growth involves discomfort. And
yes.
So a situation has to be one that is pushing the envelope slightly enough to make the other group feel uncomfortable. And then they're given an opportunity to rise to the occasion before the next step of expansion occurs. Does that, so you're exchanging it. One moment I'm pushing forward, and then I allow you to have the power to catch up. You're not trying to pull me back, and I'm not trying to pull you forward as much as we're trying to say progress is something.
But I would say it's more 60-40 than it is 50-50.
Well, because it may be that 51-49 isn't a big enough swing to take us out of that stagnant position. You know, maybe it needs to be a 10-point swing one way or another. As long as it's occurring in a respectful cycle, then I think what's happening is that we've created a growth dynamic that is sustainable, that is definitely, you know, stretching us as it should. It's developmental, but it is something that we can rise to the occasion and meet. To me, that's what real tension management is all about. It's not about trying to bring people to a place of 50-50 where they're just going to stagnate. I mean, sooner or later, 50-50, you know, when that would mean that all those infrastructural sorts of things remain the same. That would also mean that all the growth has chosen a level to stop at. Sooner or later, what's going to happen? They're going to become Kmart.
Yeah.
You know what comes to mind for me as you describe this is that there is a prerequisite to all of this, and that is a shared purpose. If everybody in the room has a very clear shared purpose and why, and it's not about their own, you know, what they have to gain from the situation, you know, they're not looking at inner financial aspects, you know, if the stock goes up or if this happens, then I'm going to gain financially from the equation, but they have a shared purpose around the business future. Then you can have this productive tension and it works. Otherwise, I don't think you'll germinate productive tension. You'll have to.
And isn't that interesting? Because, you know, one of the things that we look at in the world of ChangeWorks is this idea that importance has to be factored in. And that's what you're really saying. Do we have a shared, is this important to everybody? Are we in agreement? This is what we're all about. If we're not there, well, I can certainly get some productivity out of people who don't share the importance that I bestow upon something, because, you know, I'm compensating them. I expect I'm going to get something for all that, but I'm not going to get the kind of involvement I might really hope to have. So a good leader is good at either building that sense of importance in others or attracting people who already have that level of importance in their mind. Yep. So, I
like that idea because I think that creates enrollment as opposed to the word buy-in bothers me because it sounds like I'm being sold on something, but
you are, and you decided to buy it.
Right. But when you have this shared purpose that Boris described, you enroll, right? There's a vested interest on your part, and that creates, I call it gain opportunities, because even if we didn't start out at the same level in terms of equity in the situation, if I can leave having an understanding of what I can gain from it, then I'm more likely to enroll than not. Because win-win doesn't always mean everyone wins. If my win is bigger than your win, someone's going to feel cheated, right?
But it should all work out in the long run, because it should be the other person's time to, you know, have their goals focused upon as well. You know what I mean? It's just, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about cooperation. Cooperation is not about people having strict, balanced moments at all times. Everything, you need to have a little bit of friction. You need to have a little bit of that upgrid energy. You need to have a problem. You need to have something that everyone can focus on and then work together to make that happen. You know, and here's the real issue. Well, on the one hand, we said that we need there to be a gap, but we don't need, we need to be sufficient enough that it actually does grab somebody's attention. But if the people who are delivering the messages of these two energies begin to feel threatened by the other, and they begin to become critical of the other, and they ultimately become, what am I say, afraid of one another, defensive against the other, whatever. They're creating that gap now is too wide to be something that can result in some meaningful sort of progress. We need to maintain that level of tension in the sweet spot. So again, I think that as tension managers, if we get brought into to a situation to help facilitate all that, that's really great. The question I ask you guys though is, what happens when this is going on inside of the mind of an individual?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
so which voice in your head are you allowing to win? Or are they so much in harmony with one another that they just get together and have good discussions inside of your head, but nothing ever goes anywhere? You know, is there
Well, that's what we do in money coaching is we engage the warrior.
Yep. Tell us about that. Yep.
We don't have enough time in 5 minutes.
Well, that's all right. You can do it. You're Shags. Come on.
But it's archetypally based. It's
Yeah.
Deborah Price's work is based on traditional Jungian archetypes with a money twist, because money is a tool that's required for living. It has nothing to do with life, but everything to do with living. And we're the only creatures that have to pay to live on Earth. So there's the innocent, and we're all born as innocents, but they continue to carry that fear of not being able to learn what they need to know, and they just want to be rescued. There's the victim who's been let down either by themselves or others. They've been taken advantage of. They've never processed their pain properly. It's turned in on them. They're comfortable in their story and they like to stay there, but they're really want somebody to just take care of things for them. Not like the innocent as a white knight, but they're not really wanting to be engaged in it at all. Yeah. There's the warrior, who's the archetype of action. But the warrior has to learn to set good boundaries and not get too engaged on the end result of money, or they turn toward tyrant, or get too, overdoing for others in their mission. They can shift to martyr. So then we have the warrior martyr. The martyr is the one who is the perfectionist, would rather do it themselves than teach others how to do it, because they're only going to have to fix it anyway. They don't have a container for receiving. They really do have needs, but they cross their arms and kind of reject it. There's the fool, and we all need a little fool energy or we'd never leave the house. But the fool is not unlike the warrior in that they're engaged, but then they get distracted. Easily distracted. They don't pay attention to details.
Right. Okay. Good. Yeah.
The tyrant is the one that the end game is all about money. They want to control people, circumstances, and events using money. They suffer from chronic not enoughness, and their biggest fear is that without money they wouldn't be worthy of any value or love. Let's see, creator artist. This is the one that has a love-hate relationship with money. It's great because they've got the vision, but they don't feel authentic in having to put a price on their services. And they wish the world would just take care of itself without having to deal with money. And then the magician, I think this is 8, right? The magician is the archetype of enlightenment, awareness, and knowledge, knowing that all the source of all things we need are within us. We just need to access them and bring them together. So the idea is to have the driver be the warrior, and the passenger, the riding shotgun, is the magician, and your creator artist in the back seat. Everybody else stays in the trunk.
I like that. Yeah. Well, what I like about it too is that I can definitely feel those energies as ones that resonate with certain areas of the change grid. But
just like you can read a change grid and say, I know exactly what's going on in your head because you told me. I now, after all these years of doing this and teaching others to do it, it's really teaching others to do it that's done it for me, is I can look at somebody's score of archetypal profile and I can pretty much tell them, this is the type of conversation that might go on in your head when you have a money decision. And they look at me Boo.
Well, then, then I'd be very curious for us to do a deeper dive into the model and just see, can we, I think we've done it once
We
before. I'm
tried. We
positive
have
that
tried to
I think there were
overlay.
2 that we had to figure out. It's like Enneagrams. We have to figure out sometimes one of the archetypes or whatever to figure out where it really goes. Anyway, just to kind of bring this to closure at the top of the hour, I think I'm going to put this up with a different title than our walk around the change grid, because we've spent most of the time really talking about this whole idea about these energetic dynamics. And I think it's just really important for us as people who work very often with individuals. Do we understand what's going on with them when it comes to a situation and these 2 energies? Are they feeling an expansive energy? Are they feeling a containment energy? Have they looked at both of them? Do they respect both of them? This dynamic is playing out all around us and all within us. So yeah, okay. So with that,
May I ask real
Yep.
quickly, what were
do.
the other 2 energies? You had expansion, containment. What were the other 2?
Oh no, there's just the 2.
Oh, expansion. I thought you said 4.
No. Inside of an organization, in pride-based leadership, I do this by showing circles. And they say
Oh, okay, I got
that
you.
inside of that circle, there is an energy that's trying to make the balloon get bigger, if you will, expand it in all directions. And there's also an energy, in this case, it would be the elasticity inherent in the balloon. It's in the latex itself that's trying to hold it back, trying to keep it all in. So if we can understand what these 2 forces are like, given a particular situation in our own life, we can figure out about the whole thing. So for example, I'd like to lose, 15 pounds. How long have you guys heard me say that? I mean, come on, I've got recordings of me saying that for years. Okay. This is no news. This is no news. So I'm not in bad shape, but it'd be great if I lost
Your
15
body needs those 15 pounds.
because you got to be insulated in the desert. So it's cold at night.
That's right. You get out there working and, sweating, and you need backup.
I'm saying it's the way it is. It's the way it is.
That's funny.
So I keep going like, am I stuck because my conservative energy is ruling the day? Or is that not really the culprit? They're not to blame. What's to blame is that I haven't thought enough about the expansive part. What's the beneficial part of it to make it the power that will ultimately let the power of conservation know that it is also still been respected, taken into effect, etc. To me, the oracle of the self is always going on. This conversation is going on in our head, or we need to help people have that conversation sometimes.
Comes down to whether you want to buy new clothes or fit back into the ones you have.
Really, they'll come back in style. I'm telling you, those long pointed collars on those wild shirts that would burst into flames if you walk too close to a candle, we still have them. So, all right. Any closing comments, thoughts anyone would like to share on this?
Fascinating. I'm so glad that classes stopped on Thursday for a while.
Oh, there you go.
But you're going to start losing me on Tuesdays starting next week.
Oh man.
I know.
All right. I get them up on YouTube. They're up there.
Quite
All
a
right.
circle of brilliance.
Yeah, this is what I like. If anything, I'd like to see our circle increase in size. So maybe this coming autumn, we need to each one invite one and see what we can do to.
Happy to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun group, isn't it? We have some good conversations.
Most
yeah.
definitely.
I don't know about you guys, but I don't know any other situation in my routine life where I get to come in contact with people such as yourselves.
Well,
So
I remember when you used to charge a lot just to spend an hour with you.
yeah,
talking
well,
about this.
now if you want to spend an hour alone with me,
Better spend.
we'll have to have a
I'd rather do
conversation.
it in a group setting.
Give more detail on that.
Just
Rather
saying,
do it in a group
I
setting.
believe I have a brochure about that. So okay, anywho, there you go. All right, thanks
I think we
everybody.
were alone, but that was at the Gay Pride Parade. We're not going to talk about it.
That's right. That's right. Are there
That was a true
photos of
experience,
that?
and you don't want it on the recording, but we'll
Yeah,
tell
there
you
you
we'll tell you the story about the guys on rollerblades.
was a shocking day.
That's all they had on were rollerblades.
It was a shocking day. It's true. Okay, thanks everybody. Take care. Bye for now.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.